All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this program, a special program today. You can make out the attraction of this topic to some of the younger people here in the audience, rightly so. This is the 46th lecture that Chennai International Center is conducting. The last few lectures have been around topics on economics, legal, politics, etc. After a gap of almost, I think, 3.5, 4 months, we are touching on a technology subject. We invited a number of people who are actively engaged in this field. So I'm happy to see many of them here. Many of the people, after completing the TIE conference, I made it here. Thank you. A special welcome to all of you for taking the trouble of coming here. Today's topic is about voice, speech, and the associated technologies. For talking about that topic, we have three eminent people. But before that, I must introduce the topic. The topic is called touch to talk in a digital context. We had to add the digital context because otherwise it had a different connotation. So this is, when I spoke about this, one of my colleagues in the industry, so he referred to a book that was published last year, which is titled, What to Do When Machines Do Everything. So that's a popular book. So it talks about how machines can take over pretty much what we are doing today. And then one of the chapters, the first thing that it says is, there is still one thing that we humans have to do, that is to tell the machines what to do. So clearly that's something that's not going to go away. But that's going to change. Today we are telling the machines what to do in a variety of ways, not very, very convenient. I guess the most natural and convenient way of telling machines what to do is speech and voice, and that's what we are going to discuss today. So for that we have three eminent people, Miriam Daniel, who has come from the US, part of the Alexa team of Amazon. They have introduced a number of products, and the products that continue to impact billions of people. So she's going to talk about the technology. And then we have Mr. Samith Ramachandran. Samith Ramachandran comes from a company called Uniphore. Uniphore is a homegrown company. Uniphore is a company that was incubated in the IIT Madras Research Park that was inspired by Professor Ashok Junjunwala, who was recognized with a Lifetime Achievement Award yesterday in the TIE conference. A person who has inspired so many companies. Uniphore is one of those companies. That's in the voice space. And then hopefully he'll talk about the applications. And finally, the moderator for the evening is Dr. Madhavan Mukund, Professor, Dean of Studies of the Chennai Mathematical Institute. Chennai Mathematical Institute is engaged in research, fundamental research in areas of mathematics and computer science. So who better to moderate this session on touch to talk? With that, let me welcome Madhavan, Samith, and Miriam to the dais. And I'll leave Madhavan to take it over from here. Thank you.
Okay, let's try this now. Yeah. So today's topic, as Lakshmi mentioned, is about voice as the way to interact with computers. Now,
I think you keep it stable or just switch it off. Switch it off.
yeah. So one thing is, of course, in the last 40 years or so, we have seen a lot of transformation in the way we deal with technology, especially computing technology. So we have gone from computers which used to live in rooms of this size to computers which now fit in our pocket and which are probably much more powerful. Also, the way we use it has changed. So it used to be mostly for very specific computational tasks, either business data processing or scientific computations. Now we use it for everything, including our personal chats and listening to music and keeping track of our appointments and so on. So the nature of computation has changed, and the other thing which is really fundamental is, and that's really the topic of today's conversation, is how we interact with these devices, right? So I am old enough that I have used punch cards. So, but I'm not old enough to have used a tape, a punched tape. So, so when I first used a computer, it was a box in another room, and I would get somebody to type some obscure cards, and then at night somebody would feed it, and the next day I would get a thing saying syntax error, go back and try again. And then you do this whole thing, and it took forever, right? And then we came to interactive terminals, the kind of geeky things you see in old movies with only black screens and green text. And then we had, graphical interfaces where you could use a mouse and move things around. So at each step, the idea has been to make our connection to these devices more personal and more direct. And now, with the advent of, phones, with smartphones and tablets and all that, we are all quite used to the idea of actually using touch, for example, right? So it almost feels odd if you can't reach out to your desktop screen and touch it, because we're so used to touching things to move them around. So this has been the gradual thing, and so that is the touch part of the title, right? And now we want to go beyond touch. So we want to say that, can we actually talk to these computers in a natural way and get them to do what we want to do, and what are the challenges, what are the limitations, what is the scope? So that's basically the focus of today's talk. So the way we will structure this is we'll have two short presentations by Miriam and Samith, and then we will have a kind of a guided discussion where I will ask some questions, which they will respond to hopefully, and then we will leave it open for questions from the audience. Okay, so this is the broad structure. So I first request Miriam to talk about Alexa and Amazon.
That's better. First of all, thank you for having me here. I am from Chennai, and I'm really happy to come back here and meet a lot of you and make connections in Chennai. And thank you, Mr. Lakshmi, for facilitating this talk, and for Mr. Arvind for giving me the opportunity to come here and meet and talk to all of you. So I am from Amazon. I live in California now. And I've been a part of the Alexa team since its origin back in 2014. And I thought I would give you all a little bit of some inside story as to how Alexa came about, why we wanted to build Alexa, how we thought about voice when we first started, which might be relevant to today's conversation. And then that's it. It's just to give you a little bit of background, and after which we can start the panel. So does everybody recognize this? Okay. I grew up on Star Trek, although it was on a little TV, which is black and white in our house, but it's something we would watch every Sunday without fail. And when I joined Amazon, it so happened that there were a lot of Star Trek lovers. Okay, so we were all, inspired by this science fiction. And it wasn't just the characters in Star Trek, it wasn't just, the Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock, but it was actually the spaceship, the Starship Enterprise that was captivating for all of us. It just captured our imagination because the Captain Kirk would just stand, in the center and talk to his spaceship. Okay? And the response that came back from the spaceship, he called it computer. Okay? It was one of those early visionary things. He used to say computer, and he used to ask for things and command the computer to do things. And the response that came back never made you think that it was a machine. It actually was a human voice. Okay? It was a lady that actually gave voice to the computer. And the creator of the Star Trek series, he actually ended up marrying her. But it was very personified, right? He was talking to a personality, but that it was almost like he was commanding Starship Enterprise with just his voice. So that was actually the inspiration for us. A lot of us Star Trek fans, we used to sit inside Amazon, and we had this thing about thinking big and writing big ideas down. And we start by writing a press release, actually. So that's how Amazon works. For every idea, we start by writing a press release saying, what will you want to tell the consumer about this thing? And then we work backwards from there and say, how do we go build it? If the press release sounds really exciting and promising, then we would go invest in it. If the press release sounds drab and boring, we'd put it aside. Right? So that's how we would start on big ideas. So we went and wrote a press release about a computer that you could talk to, but not to command a spaceship. That would be too far-fetched. It was to do things around the home. You know, if you could just ask for the weather, if you could say, play my music, if you'd say, you know, what's going on with the world today, what's the news? So we thought about everyday things that you could do with voice, and we wanted to build that sort of a voice interaction model and bring it to everybody, to you and I, right? Not just to the people who are, you know, really immersed in technology. We wanted to bring it to the masses. So that's how Alexa got started back in, I would say, 2012, 2013. And the reason we were fascinated by voice is because it is the best medium of communication. It's high bandwidth communication between intelligent beings. You and I are very intelligent beings. Computers are intelligent, but you know, the human brain is far more intelligent. We create the computers, right? So voice is the medium of communication between intelligent beings. And then there is actually a quote, I think it's from Arthur C. Wilde, that says, any advanced technology is sufficiently indistinguishable from magic. And you know, voice has to become like magic, right? If you build a technology, it cannot seem like a machine. It has to seem like you just asked for something and it did it, and it has to seem magical. So we knew we had a long, hard challenge ahead of us because machines didn't sound like humans at that time. Machines sounded like machines. But we were very committed to bringing voice as the medium of interaction, so we got started. I think Madhavan just talked about this, and we actually thought about this at that time, so glad you touched on it. You know, there used to be a time, even when I was in college in BITS Pilani, we had to sit in front of terminals that were just black and white, right? And you know, lots of text on it. And like he said, you would write a program and submit it and come back and see whether it worked or it failed, right? I didn't use punch cards, by the way. But then it moved on to, you know, by the time I went from college into the job scene, graphical user interfaces came in, and you know, there was like pretty pictures and boxes on the screen, and it wasn't all just alphabets and numbers. That was a pretty big advancement in computing technology, and then came the World Wide Web. That brought information to everybody, right? It brought information to your fingertips, so that was another big jump and a leap in technology. Then came mobile. Mobile phones became smart. That's when, you know, initially with Blackberries, it used to be all, you know, numbers and letters. And then came Apple, and Apple invented applications and touch. That was very transformative. And we hope that voice is the next leap after touch. That's what we hope. That's what we wanted it to be. And I don't know if touch will go away. There are some things that touch is really good for, but there are a lot of things where you can just remove the friction if you can do it by voice. You know, very simply, if you want to call an Uber, you have to take your phone out, you have to unlock it, you have to find the app, you have to, you know, put in the address that you want to go to, you have to, you know, ask for the car to come, and then, you know, you still have to put 3 additional clicks to actually say, yes, I want to submit this request. Instead, what if you could just say, call a cab, you know, and everything just happened for you. So we know that voice can take away a lot of friction from touch, but touch still works well in some situations. Okay. So that's how we thought about voice, and we said, we invented Alexa, and we wanted to remove the science fiction out of, you know, voice. We wanted to really make it a science fact, you know, not just a figment of our imagination. We wanted to actually build it and bring it for everybody. And there's a reason why we called her Alexa, this assistant. I don't know if you know, it actually comes from the Library of Alexandria. Okay, it was used to be the ancient source of wisdom, where a lot of people actually got together and talked about, you know, life, philosophy, policies, politics, whatever was hot topic of the day, much like, seems like Chennai International Center might be doing with all of your relevant topics for your people in India. But Library of Alexandria was the place where it was a source of wisdom. And when we built Alexa, we wanted to make sure that Alexa could be the source of information for anybody that spoke to Alexa. So that's how we started with Alexa. So we gave birth to her sometime in 2014. I think it was late 2014 when we first brought Alexa and introduced her to the world. It's been a really fun journey, and we've actually seen and been at the center of evolving voice. And Alexa could only understand 11 things when we first brought her into the world. She could understand weather, news, music, few things like that. Now she can do 50,000 different things, and not all done by Amazon. There's a lot of developers out there that are inventing, with an Amazon and building skills for Alexa. But now she does a lot. She does a lot of things. And one of the things we wanted to do is make sure that Alexa did not sound like a machine or act like a machine. She had to be like a friend. She had to be like a family member. She has to be like a companion. Most importantly, she has to be like a human, like you're talking to another person. So we had to give her some personality, right? We had to teach her everything from what's your favorite color, what kind of music do you like, what sports do you like. We had to give her personality. We also had to give her, we had to teach her speech, meaning how to speak back to a human. Humans don't, speak at the same constant pace. We actually have intonations, we pause, we think, things like that. So we had to modify and modulate Alexa to speak like a human so that when you're talking to Alexa, it feels like you're talking to a friend or a family member. That took a long time. And we've come a long way in the 4 years since we launched her, since Q4 of 2014 to now. We just announced something called whisper mode for Alexa. If you whisper to Alexa because your baby's sleeping or your father is resting, she will know that you're whispering for a reason, and she's going to whisper back to you and not speak loudly. That's come a long way, right? If your speaker is at volume 8, she was blasting away, even if you were trying to speak softly. But now she reads how the human is speaking to her, and she responds back with the same tone and volume. So that's big progress in terms of how a machine speaks back to a human. But behind all of this, it feels magical. We like to say it's still day one, meaning we're still at the beginning of this invention. Even though it's been 4 years, we're just at the beginning. And it feels magical, but there's a lot of hard science behind it. There's the science of, the sophisticated hardware that needs to capture your speech, clean it from all the background noise, remove all the interference, and get the raw audio that you can actually go interpret, right? That's what we call far field voice technology. Then there's natural language understanding, which isn't even the same from country to country. Like when I speak to you, you understand my language. But let's say you're saying, how many marks did you get? It's a very Indian thing to say. How many marks did you get in this test? But in the rest of the world, a mark means like a dent on a car, or a mark on your shoe, right? So depending on who you're talking to, the word might take different meanings, right? Or when we brought Alexa to India, we realized people were not saying 2 times 2. What is 2 times 2? They were teaching their children. They were saying, what is 2 into 2, or something like that. So language is so different between people, between countries, even between the states in India, and even between family members. That's what we learned when we brought Alexa to India a year ago, exactly to the day. A year ago, I was here launching it in all the metropolitan cities in India. But even then, we felt like Alexa was not ready because Indian customers speak something very unique. It is not English. It is English mixed with so many regional languages. If you say, how do I go to Thiruvananthapuram? Okay, is Thiruvananthapuram a Malayalam word? Is it an English word, right? Or if you say, play songs by Shah Rukh Khan, Right? You don't ever say play songs by Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks doesn't sing songs. But in India, Shah Rukh Khan songs mean something, right? So everything took on a different meaning when we came to India, and we had to retrain Alexa in so many different ways. So that's what we call natural language understanding. And then there is what we call machine learning, which is deep learning in the cloud, because just because you teach her something today doesn't mean, I mean, wisdom is, there's no boundaries, right? You just can't contain wisdom. There's so much to learn. And so she cannot know everything, which means she has to continually learn from people who are talking to her, right? And you can't always be feeding her things. So she even looks at, did I answer that correctly? If the person asked me the question two times or three times, maybe I didn't answer it correctly the first time. So she looks at patterns like that and she starts relearning. So there's a lot of machine learning that happens in the cloud. So there's all of these technologies put together bring you that magical experience where you're able to talk to a machine. And at the end of it, you can just ask simple questions. I mean, that's why any advanced technology has to be indistinguishable from magic, right? With all of that happening behind the scenes, you should just be able to say, is it going to rain today? And she needs to know you're in Chennai. You're asking about the weather in Chennai, and she has to give you an intelligent answer, right? Or you should be able to sit where you are and say, turn down the AC, right? By the way, we didn't have that before we came to India, but we had to introduce, how to control the AC in India. And then we learned there are people who are like, wake me up to Suprabhadam, and we have to teach Alexa what Suprabhadam is and how to play that in the morning. Or when you just say, play my music. And my music is very different than the music my son listens to, right? I can't bear his music, and he thinks my music is outdated. But it is my music. So when she recognizes my voice and plays my music, it's very personal to me. So there's a lot of simple things that we enjoy every day, but behind the scenes, there's a lot of complex technology that's pulling it all together, right? And I'll finish with this. We're not done. We're still in day one. And Alexa or any sufficiently advanced voice technology, there's Google's Assistant, there is Apple Siri, and there's more, in the enterprise space. Samith here is working on some advanced technologies. But all of these technologies that, help you with voice are going to continue to get smarter. There's a lot more they have to learn. They're never going to, in the immediate future, approach the human brain, but maybe someday they will.
Thanks, Miriam. So, over to you, Samith.
So I'm having a Naomi Osaka moment right now after Miriam has spoken. So I don't have, I didn't prepare a presentation slide. I thought, I think a lot of the limelight is going to be taken up by Alexa. So I'm here to talk about something very similar. We work in similar technologies, similar space as such, but we look at it from a very different perspective. So while Alexa is consumer facing, out for the masses, we work with enterprise solutions as such. So basically, we apply speech technology, NLU, NLP, all of these into helping enterprises, do better business, to understand their customers better, to improve customer experience and stuff like that actually. So stepping back a little bit into, I work for Unifor, and I think we're about 10 years old now. Started dabbling with speech technologies almost 10 years back, worked on multiple different solutions, some very interesting solutions with IIT Madras long back. Simple feature phone, weather and commodity prices access for farmers in the rural India, using just a normal feature phone actually. Looking at voice authenticated a mobile payment system, purely again using a feature phone, not a smartphone actually, right? So voice is still the most primal mode of communication that humans use. Again, for enterprises, if you have a problem with your service provider, something like that, I mean, I think most often you try to find a contact center and try to call up the contact center and try to resolve your problem actually. So voice, the first contact center was set up I think in 1960s. I was just checking up on Google the other day. And so it's been what, 40, 50 years of contact centers being in existence. Voice traffic has been increasing year on year in contact centers. Enterprises are struggling to scale up to the incoming call traffic that is coming in. Keeping up the quality of customer service, customer experience is a challenge. You introduced additional, channels like emails and, chat interfaces, but voice still continues to be the most prominent mode of communication of customers with their, with the enterprises as such. So we decided to kind of step into a space with solutions which we think will help enterprises use the same technologies that we've been working with. And there are three areas that we primarily focused on. One, a solution which allows enterprises to understand the conversations that are happening between their customers and the business as such actually. Right? So we call it conversational analytics, which means extract customer insights out of it, build customer profiles out of it actually, extract information about business opportunities from these particular calls that are happening. We worked with Hindustan Unilever about a year back, and they're a FMCG company. They don't even know who their customers are right now. So for them, the wealth of information that is available in the calls that are recorded in contact centers is really the insight into what the customers are thinking about their brand, and what insights can marketing teams get out of it actually. So this is basically conversational analytics. The second area that we got into was again related to enterprises and contact centers. It's basically, again, a question probably, I don't know, when was the last time that you interacted with a contact center? What was your experience? Now, most often, your answer to that question would be that it was pathetic. I had to wait on the phone line for 5 minutes to get an agent. I got lost in the IVR menu somewhere, and I just couldn't get hold of an agent to speak to. I was just going round and round on the IVR menus out there actually. So this is exactly the problem. So I think systems that were created to help customer reach the business were not working actually. So how can you make this easy for the customer? So I think the most simplistic solution was to look at saying, instead of being greeted with, hello, welcome to ABC Bank, press 1 for this, press 2 for this, press 4 for this, and go on, so on and so forth. What if you're greeted with the message saying, welcome to ABC Bank, Mr. Samith, and how can I help you today? So all you have to say is, what, I seem to have lost my credit card and like to report that. And it captures the customer's intent automatically and is able to route the call to either an appropriate agent, or you can take it one step ahead and instead of an agent, put a bot out there, right, who can take up the request and execute it at a much faster cycle than what typically would have happened if you had kind of waited for a human agent to come in. Again, the whole idea here is not to replace human agents. The idea is that the typical contact center agent today is bogged down with too much of information with them actually. I mean, when they're on a call, I've been to contact centers and I can see, some of these people have 2 large monitors in front of them. They're pulling up so many different applications. They've told to capture 100 different information from the call as the call is happening. And these are all young people. Churn rates are pretty high in contact centers. There are continuous training cycles that are going on. So you can imagine the amount of burden that's there on the contact center agent. And that sometimes reflects in the quality of interaction actually. So the whole idea was saying that, okay, can we build assistants which can take away mundane tasks from the contact center agents, can probably even act as an assistant to a contact center, to an agent actually, which means that while the agent is on the call, the agent can do what he's best equipped to do, that is basically talk have an emotional connect with the customer, while a virtual assistant is listening into the conversation and coaching and providing inputs to the agent, saying, hey, you know what, this customer had a problem with this issue last month, and why don't you check about that actually, or this particular customer had defaulted the payment last time, so things like that. So information gets pulled up automatically for the agent. So using virtual assistants to help contact centers improve their efficiency and at the same time improve the overall customer experience. Right? And the third area that we're working with is, again, to do with this whole concept of today when you go to contact centers, especially banking services, you need to kind of authenticate yourself in some way. Right? So you typically enter, either the contact center agent will ask you some 2-3 different questions in terms of what's your date of birth, what's your email ID, what's your phone number, and then yes, you're authenticated actually. Or there's another method that you have a TPIN. You can generate a TPIN and create, but then you need to be careful that I need to hide my TPIN. Nobody should know my TPIN, because if somebody knows my TPIN, they can access my account. So a very simple technique, you can use your own voice to authenticate yourself actually. So a voice print is as unique as a fingerprint that you have today actually. So it's possible that you can authenticate yourself just by, so there is passive authentication where the person just has to speak for 5 or 10 seconds and it'll recognize that, yeah, this is Samith calling because I've got a voice print of Samith available with me actually. So imagine, almost 15-20 seconds of the conversation saved because you're not asking these silly questions. Because when a customer is calling with a problem, the last thing customer wants to do is to, rattle out my email ID and my phone number and everything else to authenticate myself actually, right? So this is voice biometrics actually, and this is with the advent of deep learning and neural networks actually, voice authentication systems have really advanced quite a lot over the last few years, and it can detect even a playback voice actually, which means that if my voice is recorded and played back, it can still recognize that it's a recorded playback actually, and so basically it's foolproof in that technique actually. So banks have started using this as a second factor of authentication already actually. So I've got Standard Chartered as my bank, and they provide now a voice authentication system, right? So basically, I think what we're talking about here is all of these technologies are driven by machine learning, AI, core speech tech actually. So there are technologies that are in play basically are speech recognition in multiple different languages. You need an NLU engine, a natural language interpretation engine, which is able to understand the conversations, as Miriam also said, and a speech synthesis engine as well, which means which is able to generate, or is able to talk back to you actually, right? So there are 3 different technologies in play, very much the same technology that's in play in Alexa actually, and this is really talking about. Basically what we're saying is these 3 technologies have advanced. Speech recognition has reached a stage at this point where I think hundreds of languages today can be recognized using speech recognition today at least. So we have 100+ languages that are supported. Indian languages, we work with engines, we work with partners. Together with them, we have access to almost 19 different Indian languages that are being supported actually, right? NLU is a challenge. I mean, English language NLU has been in place for a long time. As Miriam also was saying, in India there's a unique challenge in terms of the language constructs, the ability, the concept of using multilingual conversations as such actually. But all of these, at the end of it, is additional work, but these are all that's possible to train a deep neural network to understand some of these things actually. And I think the solutions are just kind of waiting to be discovered at this point actually. Technologies have kind of evolved, and with that, I think that was it from my side. I think we're off to.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I shall now use some primitive touch technology. So we had discussed before some ideas about what we could talk about. So we just tried to structure it a little bit, but it is not scripted in that sense. And so the first question, it's probably more addressed for the consumer space than maybe the enterprise space. But the thing is that, as you mentioned, Miriam, perhaps the two dominant ideas which have made computing a kind of mass scale thing. One is the internet, right? So the idea that there is information, useful information, which is available and interesting for people to use and rely on. And the other thing is access to this through a mobile device. You don't have to go sit on your computer. And of course, associated with that are the fact that these mobile devices are smarter. So you have touch screens and smartphones and cheap internet plans and so on. Right? So this has really been the transformation which has brought the number of people using this technology from a small few to a large number. And that has also helped do this machine learning, because now you have information feeding in from a larger user base, so you can find out more things about what people like, dislike, give suggestions and so on, or find out where the traffic jams are and things like that. So now, so all this has been happening. So now the question is specifically, what would be the extra transformational edge of voice on top of this, right? So would it have a similar, could it be like a third impacting factor, or will it be more limited in scope? What do you think?
I think, can you hear me?
Just push the top button, or the top button. Yeah, there, that's okay. Yeah.
Okay, see, it's useful already. We think voice is a simplifier. Just like touch was a simplifier. Before touch, you had to do a lot of things in terms of how to use a computer or how to write a, just get some information. You had to go do a lot, right? But the minute you got a touch-enabled phone, it simplified your life for you. We think voice is the next leap in simplifying your life. How far that will go is to be seen. However, I think voice is there to take away friction from your everyday life, right? So if you're at home, I'll give you very simple examples. If you're busy cooking in the kitchen, but you also want to listen to the news or the music, your hands are wet, you have to leave everything to go turn something on or to change your music or to change channels. Today you can just stay where you are, do what you're doing, and say, turn on the TV, put on, this particular news channel, or play this particular music, and it starts playing for you, right? So, that's a simplifier. When you're busy doing something and you want to multitask, it's a simplifier, right? So we think voice is going to simplify lives, but it's also transformative for some people. It's changing lives. Since we started this journey, we have heard so many stories that come to us from consumers every day. There are consumers who have written to us and said, my child had a speech disability, but she's now started talking to Alexa. She's more confident. She's practicing with Alexa. We've heard stories about people who are tied to wheelchairs, but now a whole world is open to them because they can control their homes, their lights and things. They don't have to be dependent on somebody else to do simple things. To access the internet, they just ask and get that information. We've had teachers write to us and say they take an Alexa device to their classrooms, and it is feeding the curiosity of the children. Specifically, we got an anecdote from a rural place in India. It's not even a major metropolitan city. A rural place in India where this teacher was gifted a little, Alexa device. He took it into his classroom, and then he wrote to us saying, this is the only way my students can improve their English, because they have to speak to Alexa in English every day, and now they're learning and their English is improving every day. So it's just a few examples of how, just the voice technology has been truly transformative for some people. It's opened up a new world for some people. But for everyday people and everyday activities like us, it's just simplified life for us, I think. I think there's a lot more that will happen with voice. It's yet to be seen. You know, it's not like we're the only ones who invent things. I think developers, application developers, skill developers, web developers, they're all starting to use voice. So everybody's now innovating with voice. I think there's a lot of exciting things to come.
Anything to say? Okay. So this is maybe to come back to something that you mentioned in your thing. So there is, of course, I mean, in the context of what we have seen in Alexa, but also in terms of other assistants like Siri and Google and all that. It's very, first of all, English focused, and therefore also in Indian context, limited to a certain group of, I would say, educated elite people, right? So what does it take to make it, so you mentioned taking voice technology to farmers and using even inexpensive devices. So what are the transformations required or the additional enablers required to make this voice thing more ubiquitous? I mean, is it only moving from English to Indian languages, or is it also that technology can somehow be simplified or embedded in other things?
Got it. So Madhavan, I think support and for Indian languages or regional languages, regional dialects, I think has been there for some time. But I think the primary area which can kind of accelerate this, in my opinion, is at least for tech companies like us, is basically data corpus actually. You know, getting our hands on lots and lots of data corpus for creating. So I remember that even when we were working with IIT to create some of these solutions, you have to actually go to the field and collect voice samples from rural India, from languages from Jharkhand Hindi to Bhojpuri, collect voice sample, lots and lots of voice samples actually, and these are then used to train the systems actually. But again, you know, this just is the tip of the iceberg basically, because this is still a limited vocabulary system actually. For you to be able to create a large vocabulary speech recognition system, you need lots of data corpus actually. And that's, but it's happening now. I mean, we know, I mean, we are working on languages ourselves. We know a lot of other smaller tech companies who are working on Indian languages and dialects actually. And from a technology perspective, I think the best part is that these can also be used, they can also be used over feature phones. So you really don't need smartphones to access voice interfaces or conversational interfaces actually. So you could actually be calling an IVR from a landline phone or even from a feature phone actually. So you still can do that. You know, you don't need really a smartphone. So I think.
So the service, you're saying the service is only talking to your, so you don't need need the voice on your phone. Correct. You need it at the other end.
Exactly. And but yes, I mean, the penetration of smartphones has indeed increased the usage of voice interfaces as such actually, and it is, as Miriam mentioned, the most natural and most easy interface for you to use it. And it requires less education to know what to click in where in the app for you to access something actually. So if every single app that probably you would see coming out will start coming with a simple voice mic button with which you can interact with your you know, any different application on your phone. But yes, technology-wise, I think it is improved quite a lot. There is more and more coverage of Indian languages, but I would still say that there's a lot of room for us to improve. If I compare the accuracies and the coverage of US English, for example, versus Indian languages, there's still quite a lot of room to cover there actually. And I think it requires probably companies like us and academia to kind of also collaborate together to be able to kind of create these enablers as such actually.
So maybe to continue on this same question, so you mentioned it briefly, but you said that there has been a lot of transformation in Alexa since it was introduced in the Indian context, and it has improved in some sense. So specifically, can you just explain how in Alexa, for instance, you are capturing maybe, is it only in terms of Indian usage of English, or are you also able to get, because there of course are two parts, there's the understanding and then there is the speech, but at least in the understanding part, is it going beyond English to?
Yeah, so in India, we've had to teach Alexa this mixed language, right? It's never just pure English. So even since we first launched, Samith is actually right in that as more and more consumers talk to Alexa, more and more data comes into the cloud. And as more data comes into the cloud, you can retrain the assistant to learn and respond better. So with Indian consumers talking to Alexa, we have learned and retrained Alexa. So there's lots of things where she has to know proper nouns are names of places, names of people are all in regional names. They're not in the English language. You can write them out with English alphabets, but they're all regional names. So you have to pronounce them correctly. You have to understand what they're saying. And then even within one family, people speak English so differently. And so, since in this past year, we've had to retrain Alexa to first understand the speech itself and then the intent or the meaning behind the speech. So both are happening. And but to actually bring it to everybody, I think we have to improve affordability also. I think enterprise technologies, as Samith said, everything's running in the cloud, and you can have a very simple phone, which gives you this power of communicating with a service. And the service can be very sophisticated, but the phone can be a really simple phone, right? But with what we're talking, like a true voice assistant in the consumer space, you still need a piece of hardware that is processing the voice and bringing you the answers. That's still, the most affordable of that is still about 4,999 rupees, right? So it's still not at a level where it is accessible and affordable to everybody. And secondly, the kind of assistance I'm talking about requires Wi-Fi, reliable Wi-Fi, right? Not all places in India have reliable Wi-Fi. We have power outages. So there is the infrastructure part of it as well. So to truly make it ubiquitous, to make it available to everybody, at least on the consumer side, the infrastructure needs to be better, the reliability needs to get better. And then we are continuing to cost reduce the devices so that it can be accessible to everybody. I mean, when phones first came out, they were pretty expensive. But now there are very cheap, affordable phones that anybody can buy into. So we want to, bring access to assistance to make it more affordable for everybody in India. Right? There's 1.2 billion people in India. There's probably less than 10 million who can afford this at this time, right? So if you want to reach the next billion people, you got to make it more affordable for them.
I don't know how many of you have heard of the recent acquisition by Flipkart. Flipkart acquired a company called Live.ai. It was a speech tech company which was building speech recognition for Indian languages, actually. And so Amazon, watch out.
So I was going to ask something about the natural language stuff, but I think that has already been covered. So now I will move on to what Miriam called the negative side. So there is, of course, there are already some indications that people are. So on one side, everybody agrees that it's something which is natural and it's easy and all that. And as Samith has pointed out, if you can get quicker through your call center to the answer that you want, then probably you'll be much happier than going around and around, as he said in the menu, saying press 1, press 9 to go back, press 4, and then finally this times out saying I don't recognize that input. But the other side is that around May there was, so Google announced a service called Duplex, which would, for instance, make a call on your behalf and book a table in a restaurant. Or it would make an appointment with, say, some service like a hairdresser or something. But the point is that that person doesn't know that Duplex is doing it, right? So from that person's perspective, a human being is calling and making an appointment. And a lot of people, so this was only a kind of a demo, but the reaction to the demo was very mixed. I mean, a lot of the news that came out, the usual, the reactions to this tech announcements, a lot of the reactions had the word creepy. Okay? So people felt that it would be really creepy if you thought you were talking to somebody, but that somebody was actually a machine, right? So this is a question which I want to ask both of you. So from a sociological point of view, so it is fine when you have a well-defined personal assistant who, as you said, becomes like a friend, and so is it a question of just getting used to it, or will there be this resistance of, and especially when it becomes a mixed situation where it's not clear that it's a machine that's talking to you, right? That you don't know who's on the other side until. So will we cross that barrier?
You're right. I mean, I think this is something which, I mean, my comments were very similar. Actually, I think I thought it was creepy. But sometimes I wonder, I mean, do you really have to mimic and say and try to hide the fact that you're a bot or you're an assistant? I sometimes feel that it's probably much easier if the person on the other side knows that he's speaking to a bot or an assistant, actually. Because what you're trying to do here is basically trying to bring in convenience, actually, right? So I don't mind talking to a bot because if I can get my job done much faster, much more conveniently, and I would probably rather call up the contact center only if my problem is not resolved by the bot, actually, right? So what you're trying to do is you're trying to give the flexibility to people, to be able to resolve issues much more efficiently, rather than and say that, okay, I delay calling up a contact center, or I only have to call up the contact center if my problems are not resolved, actually. So I still believe that it makes sense for, even if we are building a virtual assistant, to kind of announce that I'm a virtual assistant, right? And I think that brings in comfort, in my opinion, actually, and rather than hiding the whole fact around it. So Alexa, everybody knows Alexa is Alexa, actually, right? So I mean, nobody is thinking that Alexa is. So yeah, I mean, I think for the Turing test, I think this was the classic thing that I think it probably passed the Turing test out here, right? But I still feel that it will get, it should be introduced slowly. It should be introduced, carefully with regard to services which are easier to kind of address through an assistant, let an assistant handle. But when there's a complex scenario involved, it's always better to get a human involved. So I don't know, even in a customer experience space, T-Mobile in US recently introduced a specialist team of contact center. Actually, I mean, team of maybe 40 or 50 people who are experts. And what they say is that we guarantee to fix your problem in 24 hours, once you report an issue to us, actually, right? So they provide a guarantee for that, actually. So my point of view is that in software IT terms, that's basically what is called as level 3 support, who finally fix your problem, actually. The problem is, let the machines do the level 1 and level 2. And let it be open that it is a machine that is doing it, actually. And I think it will bring in more acceptance.
I think they just missed a step in the demo. They just simply had to say, hello, you're talking to Miriam's Google Assistant. I think that's where you were going.
Yeah.
And we actually, from its inception, we have voice designers. We sit in rooms and we debate every response that we have to give to a human being. When should you say something? When should you not say something? If you say, turn off the lights, you could have just turned off the light without any voice response, right? And then we said, what if it doesn't work and the user doesn't know that it worked? So we first said, when somebody says, turn off the light, let's have Alexa say, okay. So she would say, okay, and then the lights would go off. And then we thought, okay, that's redundant. If the light goes off, you know it's going off. So let's not say okay. But guess what? Customers wrote to us and said, I like that okay, bring it back in. So we brought the okay back in. So for every word, we think about, how should you respond? Is a long response or a short response? Sometimes they don't like wordy responses. You can just give short responses. So in the case of the Google Assistant making the call, I'm sure there are voice designers in Google sitting around and, discussing this, and they could have easily said, something like, hello, I'm Samith's assistant calling to make an appointment for him, right? So it was a very small thing, but it kind of builds trust with the consumer. So building trust, I think, is very important. When you're introducing new technology, you cannot do it in a way that breaks their trust or breaks their comfort level. So you got to take steps that will build trust with them, right? And over time, they may get used to it. They might then say, turn off this response. I don't need the response anymore. But when you're introducing it, you got to do it in a way that builds trust.
The most creepy in that was when it said or something.
Yes, it was trained to make these hesitating noises. But I mean, yeah, so I see what you're saying, but I also wonder how many restaurants would accept a reservation from a Google Assistant. Well, you see, this is also the point. I think that it requires both. It's a tough, trust on one side that you're talking to a bot helps you overcome the creepiness, but then do you really trust the bot to honor that reservation and show up? Who are you going to call back to say, are you coming or not, right? So anyway, so this is a complex problem, so I just wanted to...
But you're happy to do that with your app, right?
Yeah.
You can go to OpenTable, and you can just say, make a reservation. So you're happy to do that with the app. Initially, maybe you weren't happy to do it with your app. Now everybody's comfortable making reservations with an app. So maybe they'll grow into it.
Yeah, so maybe it's a question of acceptance and familiarity. So the next one is for you. So there was another story around the same time in May, right, of somebody receiving an Alexa recorded conversation from an unknowing party. So there was a family discussion, which fortunately was innocuous. I think it was something about reflooring the house, but somehow this conversation triggered Alexa to start recording, and something during the conversation triggered a thing to say, send this conversation to somebody. And this conversation went to somebody, right? So now this brings up basically this one issue, which is, I think, basically that, so any voice activated thing has to always be listening, because otherwise you can't turn on a voice activated thing, right? So a voice activated system has to by definition be listening, whether you want it to listen or not. And it has to be listening a little bit further than it needs to before it can decide that this was not something for me. So how much can we rely on these systems to A, not keep the stuff that they are not supposed to be keeping, and B, how easy or difficult is it to avoid doing something inadvertent like this, right? Because if it's supposed to respond and you make something which sounds like a reasonable request and it starts following that request, but you didn't intend it to be a request. It's much more, it's much harder to do that if you have a physical touch or a keyboard to go and do something unintentionally, or you would at least realize it. But with voice, unfortunately, because it's also at a distance, you might not even remember that that thing is in the room and you might be talking. So what is the way to get around this?
Well, you strung a lot of questions in there. Let me actually start with the incident that happened in Portland, Oregon. I've read this book in my childhood days. It was called A Series of Unfortunate Events. That's exactly what happened in that household. First of all, Alexa doesn't wake up unless she hears her name being called out as Alexa. But something in this family's conversation sounded like Alexa to that machine, right? So she woke up. Then they were talking something, and there was something in that conversation that sounded like send a message. Right? So second unfortunate event. But Alexa, she doesn't just send it right away. She says, do you want me to send a message? She has asked the family this question. Something in their discussion sounded like a yes, third unfortunate event. So she said, okay, what would you like me to send? They didn't hear that either. They continued talking, okay? So she captured a piece of audio and she said, who do you want me to send it to? Something in that message sounded like a name which was on their contact list, fourth unfortunate coincidence. So, and then she says, do you want me to send it to person X? Another something in the conversation sounded like a yes. So there were like 5 unfortunate events, back and forth confirmations going between Alexa and this family before the message went to this person. So, but what I'd like to say here is, in the 4 years that Alexa has been out there, there's billions of utterances, literally billions of utterances, coming to the cloud. And we've had this one incident, and probably one other incident that you might enjoy, which is she heard in another household, she heard somebody say something that sounded like Alexa laugh. And so she laughed. and the person thought it was creepy, right? Why is she laughing in the middle of the night? So it sounded very creepy. So in that case, again, it's a second unfortunate incident, but we went in and we changed it so that Alexa doesn't start laughing right away. These changes are very easy to make. She says, okay, I will laugh. So then there's a text confirmation before she laughs. Otherwise, it's like a creepy laugh out of the blue, right? And then, because her laugh sounded creepy, we toned her laugh down to be a little bit more modest. So anyway, we've had a couple of incidents, not denying it, but it's coupled in billions of utterances. But we immediately react to it. We try to make sure that we fix it so that whatever she responds with or confirms, has enough, this act of building trust with the customer. The second part of your question was, this thing is far away. How do I know it's listening to me? So we actually put a lot of thought into that. Again, people might forget once they get used to assistants living everywhere, but when we first introduced it, we put a lot of thought. One of the signature things in the Echo device is this LED ring that keeps flashing and going around to catch your attention. So the minute you say the word Alexa, first the ring comes up in a blue, then she blinks a few times. We actually have names for it. There is a thinking state, there is a listening state, and then there is a responding state. Each has a blue pattern to it. And in the third generation devices, we took away the ring and people complained. They got so used to that ring and it has a personality to it that they got attached to it and they said, how could you take that ring away? So the reason we put that ring is even if you're speaking, so we invented this far field technology. If you're 20 feet away, it should still be able to pick up your voice, even if the TV is playing, even if air conditioner is running. That took a lot of invention. But then we had to put this little simple, almost stupid ring around it so that people know that this thing out there is listening to you. Now, people get used to that, and maybe that's a form of reassurance to them that there is this thing out there that's listening. But we also did one more thing. When you don't want Alexa to listen to you, you push a mute button on this device that has a very bright red ring, right? You cannot mistake the red ring. And the red tells you that, and what we actually did, I know this because I run the team, the hardware is wired to a switch where we electronically disconnect the mics. So it is not software controlled. We don't trust software, right? Software can be spoofed anywhere. So it is electronically disconnected when you push that button and the switch goes on. So when you see that red ring, you can be assured that she's not listening at all, right? So we did a few things like that before we introduced the technology to make sure that we can convey to the user when Alexa's listening versus not listening or thinking or something like that. I'm not saying it's perfect, but we did our best to make sure that they can be comfortable with this technology around them.
Okay, so I think, although I have a couple of things to say, I'll stop with my questions and see if people here have some.
Very bad throat, okay, it takes 2-3 days for it to recover. How does the voice biometric function and recognition? Number one. Number two, if I collaborate with a tech savvy and a mimicry artist, okay, and I crack your password, what happens to the security aspect of this, especially for senior citizen? Question number 3. We have moved from manual to machine and now to software, remote and high-tech touchscreen. Now you are going to take us to the next level of Alexa, okay? So that means one person is going to become a couch potato. How is he going to burn the calories? So India is a diabetic centric of the globe. Your response, please.
I'll answer the third one and he can answer the first two. So we have a skill just for people like that. It's called Let's Dance. So, I'm being flippant, but you're right. I prefer, getting up and going and getting the front door or switching on the light myself. So I do prefer that. Technology, you cannot become fully reliant on technology, right? You have to make personal choices, smart choices. Just because you have the TV, you can be a couch potato, or you can get up and go work out or go for a walk and get your exercise in. So technology cannot completely overtake your life. I think we as humans have to be very cognizant about when and where we use technology. There's a time and place for it. But like the flip side of it is, when you're busy and your hands are full, voice works really well, right? Then it's a simplifier and a convenience. So I personally don't believe that technology should overtake your life and make you a couch potato. Okay. The reason I'll pass on the first two questions to him is voice biometrics is more in use in the enterprise space and very, very rarely in use in the consumer space. In the consumer space, we have created voice profiles, but it's to do very simple things. We don't do authentication into your bank account, for example. But we might just say, when I ask for music, it plays my albums. When my husband asks for music, it plays his albums. That's pretty innocuous. If you get that wrong, it's not a big risk, right? Nothing goes wrong, you don't lose money, personal information is not lost. It's a very innocuous thing. So in the consumer side, we're not yet using voice biometrics for high-level, high-risk authentication of transactions. But in the enterprise side, I think they do that.
Yeah, so to answer the first question, unless you've completely lost your voice with a laryngitis, even with a cold and a bad throat, it can recognize you actually. So typically when you introduce a voice biometric feature, you'll always have a fallback mechanism. So in case due to whatever, because most of these sensitive implementations will have a very high threshold for what is called as a false acceptance rate actually. So false acceptance rate is basically, I should not falsely accept a wrong person coming in actually. So because the thresholds are set very, very high, I think we're looking at 0.001% kind of a false acceptance rates for typically systems like that. Mimicry artists, very, very easy to identify. I in fact said that even a playback can be identified. There are ways to identify liveliness actually, which means that, am I speaking to a recorded voice or is it a live voice actually? There are multiple mechanisms that are possible. You can look at a random number generation. For example, the system will ask you to just say 456 or something like that actually, right? You just have to say that number. So it ensures that, there is liveliness, it detects the parameters that are used in a voice biometric system. 90% of those are not even audible to human ear actually. So we as humans cannot process that, but systems can process it actually. So there is a lot of, security around this. That is the reason that banking institutions, BFSI spaces really started adopting voice biometrics now actually.
I have a small request, if you could just wait for your chance to ask questions. I'm sure we'll all, we'll give the mic to everybody, but please kindly wait for your chance.
So there was a question here.
Good evening, my name is Balaji. My question is, can you rechristen the name Alexa when you bring it home?
I'm sorry, repeat that. Can you what?
Can you rechristen the name Alexa when you bring it home?
We've given her two other names. You may or may not like them. You can call her Echo or Computer or Amazon.
Not the one what I wanted.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, not yet. But we're working on it.
Okay. Second simple question, small question is, suppose I have two Alexas at home. Can each of them recognize? So I have one wife, wife has one. My wife says, play the music. And I say, don't play the music. So which would you recognize first?
So there's the question, who should she obey? Is that the question? Yeah. Who should she obey? Okay. It's a first come, first serve thing. That's how the technology was. If she says play the music, she will play, or last in, first out. And then if you say stop, she's going to stop. But more importantly, when I first got a device for my parents when they visited the US, they each wanted their own. They didn't want to share one, first of all. Then the reason was, my dad said something like, She doesn't talk back to me. I like her. And my mom said something like, at least she listens to me. So we get a lot of requests like this between husband and wives.
Miriam, you so often said, we taught Alexa, we trained her, retrained her. Now, how do you do it? I know it's a lot of science, a lot of technology behind it. If you can very simply tell us that, will be useful. And secondly, who can train, who can teach Alexa? Can it be done at the customer's end? Because if it can, then you got a problem. You know, I can teach her to commit a crime. In today's IoT connected world, I can have her crash Rajasimhan's car. Isn't it a problem?
Thankfully, we are not in Tesla yet. How do we train Alexa? The Alexa team is about tens of thousands of people now. You know, we started off as a very small 30, 40-person team. We are tens of thousands now. There's everybody from scientists to editors to linguists to stylists to people who define her personality. You don't have to be an engineer to train Alexa in the Alexa team. We actually hire journalists sometimes. We have people who pick news stories that she should be knowledgeable about. So we have people from all walks of life constantly teaching Alexa. How exactly we do it is, I could talk about it for hours. I don't think we have the time. But, very simply, how do we retrain Alexa? We are people looking at what we call friction reports. So when we came to India, we looked at what are the Indian consumers asking Alexa about. And then we looked at every time she would say, I don't know that. We looked at that response. How many times is she saying, I don't know? And what is she saying, I don't know too? And one of the biggest things was astrology. People were asking her questions about astrology. What is the outlook for me today? First thing in the morning. And we're like, oh my God, we have to teach her astrology. It's a big thing. We anticipated Bollywood and cricket. We said we took extra months to teach Alexa about Bollywood and cricket. It's a soul of India before launching Alexa in India, but we forgot astrology. So, but the way we realized that is by looking at every time she said no or I don't know. And we said, okay, if she doesn't know this and so many people are asking, we have to teach her that. So then we brought experts in astrology who would then feed the information and train Alexa. I hope that helps one part of your question.
Go ahead, yeah. And my question is
so that's a balance. So think about it this way. We actually have a skill, I think it's called Clio. Okay, Clio is a skill where people like you are teaching Alexa to speak in different Indian languages. It's not just us teaching Alexa. People like you are teaching Alexa how to speak in Tamil, in Telugu, in Kannada. They say, Alexa says, it's a game actually, how do I say this in Tamil? And then they would teach Alexa a statement. She takes that and she puts it in her brain, and then she knows from this point onwards, that's how I speak that part of that language. So there are consumers teaching Alexa now, okay? Sure, consumers can teach her bad words, right? Consumers can teach her to do bad things by writing a skill. So teaching her bad words, we actually have some linguists who actually look at what she's learning and blacklist things. So if you say mean things to her, she will not repeat it back. We actually blacklist it. But teaching her to do things, you have to submit, it's like an app. You have to submit it to Google or Apple for certification. If you're a developer, you have to submit an Alexa skill to the Alexa team for certification. And we review everything, and if we find that it's doing bad things, we will not approve it. Yeah.
Hi, my question is for Samith. Now, from a banker's point of view, right, I know the reason why, for instance, we have these complex IVR menus and, we make it as difficult as possible for a user to finally get to speak to an agent just because of the cost of that conversation, right? So I would imagine that most of your customers would be banks and, so I'm just wondering, what is in it for a bank to invest in technology like this, which is going to just bring up their costs of inbound calling rather than, for instance, getting customers to go online? And the second question would be that I understand again that you're, creating technology to get people to use virtual assistants, let's say.
Yeah.
But you know, for instance, I have built a bunch of virtual assistants in the past. I've worked with numerous banks. And the challenge with virtual assistants really is, even though it's a lot of user-generated content and learning through the process of user-generated content, eventually it's only as smart as that menu of commands and the menu of the library of information that it has. So it gets very difficult when it comes to understanding specific nuances of a problem or a situation. So I'm wondering how this would really work from, you know, from a feasibility from a bank's point of view.
Okay. So, so the first question, I think BFSI has been one of the early adopters of all of these technologies actually. So the whole BFSI sector in general as such actually. I think your first question, if I'm not wrong, what you're saying is by simplifying the IVR, you're saying that I'm bringing back the traffic into the voice instead of going to the online?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That that's a very interesting point. I think I've not heard that before actually. I mean, it's a very interesting point actually. But I think eventually what we're doing at the end of it with solutions that we have in place is managing the overall customer journey across multiple channels basically. So what you're talking about, all of these systems today are enabled through multiple channels. It could be a web, it could be an app. It could be a chatbot on the website. It could be an online portal itself, right? So the idea is basically that there will always be people who will still want to call actually, because there are complex things that they can't do probably on the portal, and mainly you're trying to improve the. So the first part that I talked about, the IVR channel as such. I don't know if you want to keep an IVR as a deterrent for people to come on to the voice channel. If that's the goal, then you know, I really don't know what to say to that, right? But you're right. I mean, I think the point is, I think there has to be the customer experience, if it's managed across all of the channels, whether it is a web or a app or a voice channel. I think the customers will stick to the channels that they're most comfortable with actually. So if I'm comfortable, for example, I hardly ever call up my bank. I do all of my stuff through my app or my online portal anyway actually. Only if I have a dispute with regard to, for example, a late charge on my credit card statement or an interest on my credit card statement, I'll probably call the bank. I don't even remember if I've called the bank for anything else as such actually. But those are things that anyway you can't handle on a website actually or an app. So the whole idea is that the voice traffic, it has decreased, but it's still growing at I think 3 or 4% every year. So the idea is that customer experience has to be managed actually, and that is where these technologies help. Now the second question was on virtual assistants in terms of what all they can do actually. I agree with you that it may not be able to do 100% and replace what a human agent would do or do 100% of whatever is done in the banking system today. The idea is to say that, you know, are you able to cover the most frequently, frequent tasks or activities that typically a consumer would need. If those are covered by any of these systems, actually, to a large extent, it solves the problem for the banking industry as such. Technology is again improving in terms of how you can improve knowledge bases, how you can improve interactions. For example, it's all about how you train your conversational assistant actually. So we train the conversational assistant using the good calls that we see from the human agents. So we have the conversational analytics piece, which is used to train the virtual assistant actually. So it behaves in a very similar manner to how your voice channel agent would behave actually. So we try to cover some of these areas to ensure that the experience is not lost. You're able to at least do most of the frequent activities through that. I mean, I think it's still some time away where, I don't even see in a near, in a probably in the next few years as well, or even in the next 10 years, where you can replace contact centers completely. I think human touch is still required. The whole idea is, make everything else easy around it. Human touch may still be required. There will still be disputes. There will still be, scenarios where you need a human agent to talk to, and that will continue actually. Yeah.
Sorry, one quick, sorry,
I think we can, yeah.
See, the smartphone made my family dysfunctional. My wife has seen the movie Her. She's not going to let me have Alexa. So, but jokes apart, when will Alexa be called as witness or be subpoena, face a subpoena for a case? Or is that possible ever?
I would never say never.
Alexa is listening all the time.
She's not listening all the time. So, first part of your question, there was a criminal event somewhere, I can't remember, in Atlanta or someplace, and the FBI wanted to know, what Alexa heard at one point. So I won't go into that. But yeah, it could happen. But the most important thing to note is unless the word Alexa comes, there's nothing that is recorded. Everybody needs to know that. It's like a wake word. It's like she's sleeping, and then you suddenly wake up when your name is heard, right? So no audio is recorded until that word is recognized. And then after that word is recognized, there's X seconds of audio that is actually heard, sent to the cloud. If she thinks it's something meaningful, she'll respond. And then you can actually see it online. We are very transparent. You can see what she heard. If she actually thought she woke up by mistake, she will discard it. So it's not available. So that's what we had to explain to the law enforcement agencies too, that if she was never invoked, there's nothing recorded, so there's nothing for you to hear.
Yeah, can you switch a little bit and we're talking about speech recognition, speech synthesis. Like the Stephen Hawking story, that's something that we all heard. Is it possible? Where is the state of the art as far as translating thought, or let's say, for example, a disabled child? Can we give voice to that child through technology?
I think it's certainly doable. At least what we have done, for example, is I cannot speak to thought to voice, but I can speak text to voice. So if you're not able to speak, but if you're able to type and send something, you can absolutely give voice to that. So it's the reverse. It's instead of speech to text, it's text to speech. So we actually have, as part of Amazon's web services, we have opened up a service called Polly, which any business can use. You send a piece of text, it comes back as voice. So you can do that. So if somebody's disabled, they're not able to speak, but they're able to type, they can use that to generate voice for sure. Thought to voice is still a little far-fetched, I would think. What do you say?
So I think specifically on that, the particular condition that Stephen Hawking had, it's now possible for you to actually, if you're diagnosed with this problem and you know that you're going to lose your voice, it's possible now that you can actually give your voice and build a synthesized voice for yourself, which is going to sound exactly like you actually. Because machine learning has made that possible actually, to collect somebody's voice and to be able to use that to synthesize. I mean, it's also, there's a flip side to it that you can mimic anybody's voice using that actually. But yes, the technology has improved quite a lot at this point actually, and now we have, I was in the Bay Area a couple of weeks back actually, we were talking to a company which is working on speech synthesis, and they actually use, so I think it's possible, because one of the things I remember when I was also speaking to Professor Junjanwala about a month back, he said, your virtual assistant should be able to understand the dialect and the tone of speech that is being spoken by the customer and able to match it when you respond back actually. Can you speak back with the same accent and the same tone back to the customer? And this is something which is now starting to happen actually. So you have technology that is available right now which can modulate the emotions, which means mimic the emotions that are appropriate for a particular scenario. It's possible to mimic the voice in different emotional states. It's possible to look at different age groups. Say that I can generate a voice with an older person's voice or a younger person's voice. So voice synthesis is really the focus at this point, mainly because that is what is going to make or break the whole interaction quality as such, actually. So there's a lot of, because speech recognition is already done for, so synthesis is where the focus is.
We have another 5 minutes. If we could please keep the questions crisp. And, I see a lot of hands, so we'll.
My question is, I've been recently reading a book by Yuval Noah Harari on 21st century 21 thoughts. I don't know if you have come across that book. It talks about the inventions in artificial intelligence or the progress made in artificial intelligence leading to digital dictatorships, and also actually mimicking what Lakshmi was saying, controlling even the emotions of men and women, including gender, and making them do things almost at an individual level of what a particular authority wants. Supposing Amazon is given a mandate by the US president that you make all Americans think in a particular way, and if AI becomes ubiquitous, it would lead to degradation of democracy or a certain kind of a digital authoritarianism. So it was a very interesting thought that came out in the book. So I thought, what do you think about it? Do you think that AI becoming ubiquitous is going to lead to a different kind of a world? What kind of a world do you envisage?
In a world of fake news, anything is possible, I guess. We haven't gone that far yet, right? We're basically we're just scratching the surface of AI still. There can be a future world where, that some powers are controlling, what's being disseminated through AI. But we're not there yet. As long as these, AIs are being controlled by privately held companies and not the government, as long as it is being built with privacy and security in mind versus, influencing and controlling in mind, I think it can still be of good use and of service to humanity. The future is the future, right? You don't know where.
Is there a regulatory framework?
Right now, there is no regulatory framework across the AI space. It is more of, we are being transparent in what we are building. We're transparent with what data is being collected. We're transparent with how the data is being used. We try to give control back to the customer as to whether you want to retain the data or delete the data. So we try to be very transparent to build that trust. There is nobody regulating it except for our own policies. Right now, there is no central authority around it.
Yeah, I have a question specific to both the enterprise segment as well as on the consumer side. This is specific to, as you know, the underlying aspect of all of Alexa or all of these systems is basically the data, right? And today we are only talking about auditory data, right? I mean, you look at a typical human, we have visual, we have tactile. A Fitbit has about 1 billion data points already in place. You don't even want to talk about the kind of information Facebook has on the visual space, right? So on the next evolution of Alexa, and this is coming from a person who's already, building skills on Alexa, what is it that you're seeing both from the enterprise segment where the data is a lot more structured and it's within an environment, and the consumer segment where the data is a lot more unstructured and you're taking things from web? How do you see this evolving on the next level of conversational AI specifically?
I think it's getting contextual. That is the next level that it's getting to. It is, instead of just having a binary answer to a question, the answer becomes very contextual. And context means additional data points, right? It takes, the time of day into account. It takes your personal identity into account. It takes your location into account. So it's a long answer, but the short version of it is the next step of AI is to take the response and make it very contextual and personal.
Hello, I'm Saraswati. 2 quick questions. Alexa is interesting, no doubt, but to be the devil's advocate role, my concern is whether it's going to impact the relations and probably break the connects. For example, a child or a teenager may like to interact with the Alexa more than with a brother or sister, because they are not going to complain or they are not going to find fault. So my concern is whether it will lead to more depression because the relation, I mean, it's a point of concern, probably even as a parent. And the other question on the enterprise side, now with so much talk on the data protection bills, the machine may not really distinguish the complexities and the thing. So how are you going to manage? Because this could increase the complexities.
Do you want me to answer the second question?
Yeah.
I'll answer the second question first. So almost all of us are, today we know, we work with BFSI sector, we work with US healthcare sector, we know that there is PHI, that all of this data which is very, very personal. Redaction is something which we take care of in all our solutions that we build today, which basically means that all personal information is stripped out of the data when you're dealing with solutions like these actually. And GDPR compliance is again very important actually, which means that's not just even at the solution that we have, which any consumer will have the right to say that, okay, you have to erase my data, and you need to be able to provide mechanisms to be able to do that actually. So all these solutions, it's really important that you are GDPR compliant, you're HIPAA compliant, you're PCI DSS compliant, and yeah, all of that really.
Yeah, just a question from the data privacy perspective. So as an application developer, we are concerned where this data is getting stored. For example, if we are going to use Alexa's capability to book, we have a carpooling platform. So just in case my users are going to use Alexa, where this data is getting stored? And is there a regulation that it should be within the country? How are we going to comply to that?
Some countries have that regulation, and when there is such a regulation, we do keep the services and the data in that country, but most countries are okay with servers being in the US or Europe and load balancing, right? But just to be very clear, there is your data that your business owns about the customer. You're a carpool, so you know your customer better than we do. Then there is the voice data. It's two separate things. So you don't necessarily have to, give all the data to Amazon. Neither does Amazon have to give all the voice data to you. It's just a handshake that says your customer asked for a car, right? We don't have to give you the voice data, and you come back and say, here's the car, right? So you don't have to share the customer's, card information or anything back with Amazon. So, data resides where it should with whoever they've given the data to.
Thanks.
Yeah. So, moving beyond human, can Alexa recognize cow's voice? I'm asking you with this reason because I'm moving to business, not to consumer. Yeah. After all 12 synthesis of voice, I can understand and recognize because I've grown cows when I was young and I was cheated to come to software field with AI. Okay.
You should join Amazon and you should write the language models for
I think we can take more questions outside. It's time for us to close the session.
But remember this question, because the competency is lost. It's only in communication. We can easily manage the show there.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Plenty of questions. It's a very interesting topic. Give a big hand to the speakers. Thank you, Madhavan. Thank you, Miriam and Samith. And we've already got the title for the next topic. I don't know whether it's going to be this year, next year, or 2 years, or 5 years hence. That will be on Thought to Talk. Thank you very much.
Hope you invite us back for that.
Yes.